Mark's got it going on a Monday. What's going on? Welcome in. Kicking off Super Bowl week, and what a better way to start, forget Red Friday, Red Week here in Kansas City than Taylor Swift taking home a ton of Grammys, including, most importantly, Album of the Year, as she becomes the only artist to ever win Album of the Year 4 times, John Anthony. Good morning.
I walked out here Friday afternoon going, man, good, bad, the ugly on Monday morning is going to be great. Pete's got choices. What is going to be ugly, the Pro Bowl or the Grammys? I don't know if the Grammys contend here, it sounds like.
Hey,
I don't think they contend for ugly. Huh?
I don't think so either.
Okay. All right.
I watched them last night. I watched that whole opening monologue with Trevor Noah, and there was not a lot of wokeness last night in the Grammys. You know, there was one dope who got up there and yelled ceasefire. But outside of that, I mean, that's like par for the course. That was happening back in the George W. Bush and Bill Clinton days. That was nothing. It was not the woke evening that, you know, many of us have expected for quite some time. And I guarantee you this is going to have the best ratings since pre-COVID for the Grammys. So overall, Taylor Swift has herself a historic night. Travis, of course, was not there. Despite rumors to the contrary, he was traveling to the Super Bowl yesterday, but it was a good evening overall.
He was pulling a Jason Kelsey, taking his shirt off in the hotel room, screaming, yeah, after she won the award.
Right. Yeah. Hey, if you haven't seen it, by the way, we took the girls down to Union Station on Friday afternoon, and they have a cutout of Kelsey with his shirt off, doing that whole thing with a beer in his hand. It's pretty funny. I put a photo up of the girls yesterday. There's also a little Taylor Swift cutout. I put a photo up of the girls in my Instagram stories last night in honor of Taylor's big night at the Grammys. So that's up at Pete Mundo if you want to see it there. But Union Station's very well done. It's always well done when, you know, the team's making this kind of a run over the last few years. But the Taylor Swift cutouts and the Jason Kelsey shirtless holding a beer cutouts are also very entertaining as well. So if you haven't gone down there, you'll, of course, have time over the next few days. And try to not go on Saturday or Sunday because the lines are a lot shorter. Just, you know,
pack a lunch. Bring snacks.
Well, I'm telling you, though, Friday, we mapped out and we figured an hour and a half will be here. 30 minutes, we were in and out because there was no one there on Friday afternoon. So avoid the Saturday thing if you can and make it a little afternoon trip. It'll be good. Now, things that were not all that good yesterday. Before the Grammys on CBS was 60 Minutes. And Jerome Powell, the feckless Fed chair, as Ken Coleman of the Ramsey Show likes to call him, and Ken will be on this show at 8 o'clock this morning. So Ken coined the phrase feckless Fed chair, Jerome Powell. Well, he proved just how feckless he was in this 60 Minutes interview before the Grammys last night. Jerome Powell was asked a very, simple question, and a good question, about whether or not he will wait to get inflation to 2% before he starts cutting rates. Now, inflation is the Fed's target. 2% is the inflation target for the Fed. That's where they want to be year after year. Basically, if inflation stays around 2%, they feel like the economy is in a pretty good spot. Of course, we know that inflation has not been 2% in going on 3 years at this point. We know that this economy has dealt with incredible inflation over the last couple of years in particular. Prices up 16, 17% all in all over the last 3 years. Inflation is still at 3.5%. So Jerome Powell's, there's only so much he can do. He can't force Congress to pass good fiscal policy. He can only kind of try to decrease supply or really decrease demand in the economy. He can't increase supply. He can only affect demand through things like interest rates. But Jerome Powell gets asked by Scott Pelley, CBS, 60 Minutes last night, about if he will wait to cut interest rates until they get inflation down to 2%. And Powell said something that just, had me jumping through my wall yesterday.
Are you committed to getting all the way to 2.0 before you cut the rates?
No, that's not what we say at all. No. We're committed to returning inflation to 2% over time. I've said that we wouldn't wait to get to 2% to cut rates.
Now, that is very dangerous for the economy. My hope is that Jerome Powell would wait to get to 2% on the inflation number before he even considers cutting interest rates. In fact, I'd rather see inflation hover around 2% for a period of time before considering cutting inflation or cutting interest rates. I see no advantage to cut interest rates right now based on where inflation is at. And on top of that, you had a jobs report that came in on Friday, nearly double expectations. Now, how much of that is people looking for second jobs, people looking for supplemental income? I don't know. But either way, you still have a red-hot jobs market. You have inflation that could easily skyrocket once again if you guys start cutting rates. And Jerome Powell saying, well, we are not married on waiting until we get to 2% inflation to cut interest rates. That's horrible fiscal policy on his end, monetary policy. He should wait until it gets down to 2%. He should not touch these interest rates until you get near 2%. Because right now you have an economy that is still feeling the burden of inflation. It is the biggest driver of everything that people care about and talk about right now. That's what all the polling shows. And you've got to get this thing back down to normal, whatever normal is, as quickly as you possibly can. Now, the insinuation there is that we're sitting here in an election year and Powell is going to be pressured to cut rates to make people feel better about the economy and then make people feel better about a potential reelection of Joe Biden. I don't know if I can get there at this point, but if he starts to aggressively cut rates, let's say late spring, early summer, and we're still sitting there at 3.5% inflation, which is, do the math, 60, 70% higher than the Fed's target goal, then I will start to question as well the politicization of the Fed. I don't want to think like that. I don't want to be in a place where we're thinking about the Fed from a political angle, but I would have no other choice but to think about it that way. Now, interestingly, on the economic front, MSNBC is in a very tough spot. Take a listen to this clip over the weekend from MSNBC talking about and talking to a bunch of black business owners in a barbershop and what they're thinking about going into 2024.
There are some people in your orbit who are either voting for Donald Trump or considering it?
For sure. A lot of my friends are obviously my age, so we're a little younger. We've only voted once, for a president. And Trump is kind of all we know. And they're kind of Trump and Biden. They're like, well, we were broke with Biden. We weren't with Trump. And that's kind of the only thing that I'm hearing over and over again is that, well, Trump, we had money. Well, okay.
Tough spot for MSNBC. They are really caught between two narratives right now, aren't they? They want to pander to certain communities, but certain communities are not on board with what they see as the best way forward for the economy and for the country. Boy, they have got the MSNBC talking heads and hosts. Even Al's going to be, pissing in the wind on this one.
Show some RESPICT.
Tough spot for the Rev. What's he going to do? What do you got for me, Rev? Let's turn on Morning Joe this morning and cut to the Rev. How's he explain that one away? The economy is going to drive this thing. It's the economy, stupid. And that is never more true in the last generation than the economy we have been living through that, yes, is working for the upper end of the spectrum, but is not working for the middle class and is certainly not working for the poor working class. And Jerome Powell opening up this potential can of worms saying, cut rates whenever I see fit. We don't need to be at 2% inflation. Please don't. If you do, you might get an economic win, or I should say a political win for the people in power right now, but it will continue to grow the economy between the haves and the have-nots. Well said there by Bill O'Reilly, who is going to be on the show on Friday. I reached out to him. I said, hey, we heard that Super Bowl pick of yours Thursday morning, I think it was, when he said he was going to be pulling for the Niners. So we got some beef with you here in KC, Bill. So he said he would appear on the show on Friday prior to the Super Bowl at 8 o'clock. So I know it's a ways away, but we're going to have some good Super Bowl guests this week, and Bill O'Reilly's going to be one of them. He'll break down the game and then break down the disastrous border bill that's on the table as well. How about that? On the text line, 913-408-7957. Just talking about the Grammys, top of the hour. Pete, welcome to Gen Z. We don't know who's a guy and who's a girl anymore. It's tough out there. I feel you. I don't know what to tell you. I feel you. I'm glad I'm out of that game. But I mentioned I had to Google Billie Eilish. Is that a guy or a girl? Because I had no idea. I got to figure. I mean, I had an inkling. I had a guess. My guess was right. But nowadays, you can't be sure. Just got to roll with the punches, man, and see where it lands. Joe's in Leavenworth. What's up, Joe?
Hey, man, I know it's not Tirade Tuesday, but Jay-Z, when he wins the Global Impact Award, he doesn't talk about global impact. He goes on this mini tirade himself about how Beyonce has won more Grammys than any other person in history, but she still hasn't gotten Album of the Year. And I'm like, what hypocrisy is that?
Hey.
Just talk about your global impact, man. Like, there's no injustice against Beyonce. She's won 32 times.
Hey, man, here's the name of the game. You know as well as I do. Even when you are one of the most powerful, wealthy, important peoples on the planet, you got to figure out how to become a victim.
Oh, yeah. And if you go and look at the top 10, total recipients of the Grammys, the music industry is clearly multidimensional. So I just wish that I wish people would just get off the soapbox of everything about race, because I feel like the Grammys are they are what they are. It's a self-industry pat on the back. She's been patted on the back 32 times. Album of the Year is just one more trophy to throw in a box in her closet anyway.
Hey, well said there, Joe. As someone noted on the text line as well, Nolan Ryan never won a Cy Young.
Exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
Well done there, Joe. Have
Take
a good
care,
day,
brother.
buddy. All right, he saved it. He got in an early tirade Tuesday. We're good with that on KCMO. I mean, we could do a tirade Monday whenever you want. Trust me. Plenty of you I know are getting out of the office or getting to the office this morning and are ready for a tirade, so we can make that work as well. But, Nolan Ryan never won a Cy Young, so I don't want to hear Jay-Z crying about how Beyonce never won Album of the Year. But he did have a good line. I meant to pull it before the show, but he made a reference to something about getting robbed. He said Beyonce's gotten robbed more than any of you have been robbed, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. And then he says, although some of you might get robbed after the show tonight. And I was like, well, that's pretty good. I mean, I don't know if he meant to take a dig at what a dump L.A. and California has become at large, but he did it. Not sure if that was he was going for, but I was like, oh, that's all right. I can get on board with that, Jay-Z. That's pretty good. Oh, man. Good morning. It's so great to be here as we are going to be giving away big game programs 8:15 and 11:15 every day this week on KCMO. And the big game, wink, wink, nod, nod, big game program. You can read between the lines on what that means. But we have the official big game program that we'll give away to the seventh caller 8:15 this morning, and then in Ray Stevens' show at 11:15 as well. So that's all coming up, part of a busy morning. And if you have not yet, RSVP for our Politics in a Pint. We'll be out there next Thursday, the 15th, Tiffin J's and Lee Summit with Bill Eigel. He is running for governor of Missouri, state senator, member of the Missouri Freedom Caucus as well. And he's entertaining. You may not like him, but he's entertaining, and he's got something to say. And space is filling up. So if you have not RSVP'd for that, do that now at KCMOTalkRadio.com. It is going to be a great night, our first Politics in a Pint of 2024. Looking forward to that and hope that you'll be there with us, especially if you're on the Missouri side, because we're going to have all the gubernatorial candidates out, and it's going to be a grand old time. Jerome Powell last night on 60 Minutes. If you haven't seen any of what Jerome Powell said, the most important thing, well, he said a lot of actually very important things. Some are good, some are not so good. $35 trillion in debt. This was in the lead up to the Grammys last night. Jerome Powell, 60 Minutes, sit down with Scott Pelley, talking about the $35 trillion in debt and saying what our political leaders should be screaming from the rooftops.
30 years from now, it is projected to be $144 trillion, or $1 million per household. How do you assess the national debt?
We mostly try very hard not to comment on fiscal policy and instruct Congress on how to do their job when actually they have oversight over us.
But is the national debt a danger to the economy, in your view?
In the long run, the U.S. is on an unsustainable fiscal path. The U.S. federal government's on an unsustainable fiscal path, and that just means that the debt is growing faster than the economy.
I have the sense this worries you very much.
Over the long run, of course it does. We're borrowing from future generations. It's time for us to get back to putting a priority on fiscal sustainability, and sooner is better than later.
Well, it's about time somebody said it. Our political leaders don't want to say it on either side of the aisle. We know that Joe Biden and Democrats will never, ever, ever, ever say anything about our national debt. And Republicans won't because, well, they're afraid. I mean, they'll say things about it, but they're not serious about it. And I know they're not serious about it because if you're serious about it, you would talk about entitlement reform, which, yes, does include Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Even though you've paid into it, it's under the umbrella of entitlement reform. It is a failed system that has gone off a fiscal cliff. And it's well over 50% of the budget at this point. And until we get it under control, you can't just cut Ukraine funding and balance the budget. It's impossible. So I'm glad someone's willing to say it, even if it's Jerome Powell, our feckless Fed chair. That's from the Grammys last night as Luke Combs performed with Tracy Chapman, his number one hit song from this past year that obviously has been controversial in some corners in some capacity. Before I get to why, right now is your chance to win. With Kansas City back in the big game, you can have the official big game, wink, wink, nod, nod program delivered to your home. It's perfect for the big game party and a must-have for collectors. Caller 7 right now, 913-408-7957. 913-408-7957. We are giving away the official big game program to the 7th caller right now on KCMO. 8:15 at 11:15 every day on KCMO. Order yours now at superbowlprogram.us. So win that official big game program. Caller 7 to John Anthony. 913-408-7957. So it was a great performance last night. It was in the first 20 minutes of the Grammys. And listen, I prefer Luke Combs' rendition to Tracy Chapman's now that I've heard them both ad nauseum over the last year. I mean, hers was always classic, but I just like his spin on it a little bit better. That being said, they came together last night and they performed this song. And they did a really good job with it. But I was thinking back to over the summer when this song started taking off. And I remember talking about this article that was in the Washington Post at the time. This is from July 13th. And the headline is Tracy Chapman, Luke Combs, and the complicated response to Fast Car. And it talked about how Tracy Chapman's Fast Car is one of those songs that you just feel in your soul. The lyrics about the yearning to escape, the gentle guitar underlying a feeling of despair, but also the hope that something better is coming. It can make you cry, but also inspire you to belt out the lyrics at the top of your lungs. And they go on to note how Luke Combs released a new album that included Fast Car, a longtime favorite that he covered during live shows for years. But when the track hit streaming services, it took on a life of its own, racking up enormous numbers and going viral. The article goes on to note, it's also prompted a wave of complicated feelings amongst some listeners and in the Nashville music community. Although many are thrilled to see Fast Car back in the spotlight and a new generation discovering Chapman's work, it's clouded by the fact that as a black queer woman, Chapman, 59, would have almost zero chance of that achievement herself in country music. The numbers are bleak, writes the Washington Post. A recent study by data journalists report that fewer than 0.5% of songs played on country radio in 2022 were by women of color and LGBTQ plus artists. Watson's previous work shows that songs by women of color and LGBTQ plus artists were largely excluded from radio playlists for most of the 2 decades prior. So they're trying to create a narrative driven by race, driven by preferences on who you sleep with, into a song that had become a hit in 2023 in a remake of Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, which, by the way, had an enormous amount of success going back 35 years. Let's not forget that. So they tried to create a wedge issue. Instead of just celebrating a great song, a remake of Tracy Chapman's incredible success from the late 80s on this song, instead of celebrating that, of course, it always has to come back to identity politics for outlets like the Washington Post. And to Tracy Chapman's credit, she never took the bait. Never. The Washington Post went on to quote all these people about how this is, bothersome, and I don't know if Tracy could have ever done this. And what was the statement from Tracy Chapman amidst all this made-up faux controversy over the summer? Here it was. Tracy Chapman said over the summer about this made-up controversy, quote, "I never expected to find myself on the country charts, but I'm honored to be there. I'm happy for Luke Combs and his success and grateful that new fans have found and embraced Fast Car." That's it. And credit to Tracy Chapman for taking the high road, for taking that approach, and then appearing on stage last night with Luke Combs to sing this song together as a duet, to bring it more global attention, and to basically give Luke her blessing when a lot of people did not want her to give Luke Combs her blessing. A lot of people wanted her to buy into the nonsense narrative they were trying to create, to push this whole thing of, well, you're right, I don't know if I could have had this success in Nashville because, boy, I don't know if they like people that look like me. She never went that road. She never took the bait. And not only did she never take the bait, but credit to Tracy Chapman for also giving Luke Combs his blessing, her blessing last night in an awesome duet that if you haven't seen it, it is worth your time. We're going to have a good time out at Tiff and Jay's next Thursday in Lee's Summit. If you haven't RSVP'd for Politics in a Pint on February 15th, join us there with Bill Eigel. He's running for governor of Missouri, and he's a fireball, man. He's really fun. You are not going to be bored coming out to that event next Thursday at Tiff and Jay's in Lee's Summit. But you have to RSVP at kcmotalkradio.com. We're starting to fill up. So make sure you get on that RSVP list now. Go to the website and get your name on the list. And we'll see you next Thursday night at Tiff and Jay's in Lee's Summit. Night after Valentine's Day, of course. So all the talk about this border bill that got released yesterday. Bipartisan in the Senate, James Langford, a Republican down in Oklahoma, helped negotiate this with Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell. So, listen, it's like hundreds of pages. As always, Congress can't do anything clean and easy. They're incapable of doing it. I wish it wasn't the case, but they can't help themselves. And all in all, you look at this thing and you say to yourself, okay, what's in it for the American people? Does it limit and does it solve the crisis at the border? And the short answer is no. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can take the word of Chris Murphy. Chris Murphy is an uber progressive U.S. senator from the state of Connecticut. And he put up a big Twitter thread last night, that's X, on this bipartisan national security funding bill. And first off, this should just, before you even get to the details of it, it should drive you nuts when you look at how the monies are broken down. $118 billion, $60 billion, half the money is aid to Ukraine. $14 billion is to Israel and $20 billion for security on the border. 3x the amount of money for Ukraine's border than America's border. I have said for a long time, I am sympathetic to Ukraine. I don't want Putin to gain any more power in that part of the world. I see value in us helping Ukraine, but it's imperative that we understand the end game and that the American taxpayer doesn't just continue to be on the hook with no obvious goals in sight. And that's where we're at right now. 10 billion here, 50 billion there. What's another 15 to 20 billion? I mean, keep the billions rolling on out for Ukraine. All many of us are asking is, okay, what's the end game? How do you get there? How do you achieve it? And how much more money are we going to be on the hook for? It's not anti-Ukraine to ask those questions. It's kind of common sense. Like if you were running a business, you'd kind of be asking these questions. But, with Congress, of course, they don't care. They don't know any better, so they don't bother doing it. But it's stunning that the same people who are like, if you ask any questions about Ukrainian funding, well, you just are a Putin stooge. They also want to give 3 times the amount of money to Ukraine because their borders are very critical. Very, very critical. But ours here on the southern border, not so much. What's the big deal? We'll give you $20 billion for border security here in the U.S., $60 billion for Ukraine to protect its border. That is stunning, but unsurprising hypocrisy is probably the best way to put it. So Chris Murphy, U.S. Senator from Connecticut, he puts up this Twitter thread last night, and here's part of what he notes. He says, as co-author of the immigration provisions, here's a thread on the key elements. First, it would be easy to just keep immigration and border policy as a political cudgel for another 40 years. But politics at its best is about finding bipartisan compromise on the toughest issues. That's what we've done here. Here's a snapshot of what's in the bill, he writes. A quicker, fairer asylum process, no more 10-year waits. Claims processed in a non-detained, non-adversarial way in 6 months. A slightly higher asylum screening standard at the border. Slightly higher asylum screening standard. Basically saying people who are just show up at the border, hey, I'm claiming asylum. You better allow me to claim asylum. If not, damn it, you got a problem on your hands. That's ridiculous. Also, no more waiting for work permits. Most asylum seekers can now work immediately. Wow. So a slightly higher threshold for claiming asylum, but you can work right away. What could possibly go wrong? Brand new right to legal representation for all immigrants. Remember, writes Chris Murphy, when Trump denied lawyers to victims of the Muslim ban? Never again. Mr. Bipartisan still using that kind of language, the Muslim ban. There was never a Muslim ban. Chris Murphy then writes, a requirement the president funnel asylum claims to the land ports of entry when more than 5,000 people a day cross the border. The border never closes, but claims must be processed at the ports. He writes there, the border never closes. Chris Murphy, Democrat U.S. Senator from Connecticut. That's all I need to hear. The border never closes. And only after 5,000 people a day come in illegally do they then start funneling people to ports of entry. I mean, are they serious with this? My goodness. 913-408-7957. Larry's checking in from Prairie Village. What's up, Larry?
When you compare our border situation to what's going on into the Ukraine, look what we got going on at our border. I mean, we're trying to help these poor people that the entire Russian army is trying to destroy them. You think our situation is anywhere comparable to what those people are going through?
Yeah.
You're serious. The migrants, the people crossing the border are just as dangerous as the Russian army is.
I didn't say that, but it's comparable because you know as well as I do that terrorists have come into this country over the last 3 years and we don't know where they are.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. What would be your solution? Just set up a line of machine gunners at the border and anything that moves, just mowing down. I mean, how can you stop people crossing the border?
Were you alive from 2016 to 2020?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Do you remember Remain in Mexico policy that Donald Trump had in place that said if you want to claim asylum, that's great. You got to wait your turn and you got to stay in Mexico till we get to you.
Yes, and those for the people that were trying to play it legit. But that doesn't have anything to do with the hordes of people that are crossing illegally and will always cross illegally because the border's too large to completely stamp it out.
Would you bring back Remain in Mexico, Larry?
Would I bring that back?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know. Here's the thing. How much of a hellhole is it in Mexico? Are they? I mean,
not my problem. It's if you're truly claiming asylum and you come from a third world hellhole, to use your words, Mexico's a heck of a lot better than where you were.
Well, I would say that's not totally unacceptable, but I don't know all the ramifications to that. I don't know why it was ended.
And you know what else we don't know, Larry? We don't know the ramifications of what we are living through the last 3 years. We don't know. We do not know.
You really think the situation on our border is anywhere comparable to what the Ukraine's going through? It's minute. It's nothing. It's patty cake time compared to a major army.
Larry, you can do two things. I got to run, brother. We got to do two things at the same time. I'm not opposed to giving Ukraine a little bit of coin. But to care more about the Ukrainian border than what we're doing on our southern border, yes, that's problematic. News in a minute. We're back with you in the 9 o'clock hour. I just can't believe how much attention this story keeps getting. My father-in-law sent me a link to this last night in the New York Post, and it's about, once again, another story over the weekend about these three men who died in the Northland fentanyl poisoning, which is what it looks like happened here. The headline reads as follows. Did suburban Walter White poison his friends? Unraveling mystery of Kansas City Chiefs fans' frozen fentanyl deaths. Now, Breaking Bad is an all-timer. One of the great shows that I've ever watched. I mean, to me, Breaking Bad is top 3 with Sopranos, and then we could debate number 3 sometime down the road. I'll take your texts at 913-408-7957. But I would put Breaking Bad and Sopranos undoubtedly in the top 3 of all-time television shows. So I like any Walter White references here, but I struggle to see how we have any evidence at this point in time that this is Walter White-ish or Walter White-esque what is going on and what happened in the Northland. So the article from the New York Post goes on to note that April Mahoney was so desperate to find her missing fiancé, Clayton McGinney, that she took matters into her own hands after 9 p.m. on January 9th. She pounded fruitlessly for 10 minutes on the door of Kansas City, Missouri rental belonging to Jordan Willis, where McGinney and his friends were last seen 2 days earlier. She then broke through a basement window, yelling to see if anybody was home. Next, she walked upstairs, looked out the large black windows, and that's where she spotted a frozen body of one of the men, David Harrington, seated upright in a lawn chair. She was so upset she did not immediately see that her fiancé was also dead on the ground, beside a third man, Ricky Johnson, who was also dead. April saw David and she totally panicked and could not breathe, and she called the police. Clayton's uncle told the New York Post. The cops showed up within minutes, and Jordan, the guy whose house it was, opens up the door, no problem, wearing his boxers and holding an empty glass of wine. Since then, the mystery of how McGinney, Harrington, and Johnson, all in their 30s, died seemingly simultaneously in the snowy backyard, while Willis, their host, a 38-year-old HIV research scientist, said he had been sleeping for 48 hours and had no idea his buddies had expired in full view of the home. Preliminary toxicology results, we talked about this late last week, indicated the men died from the effects of cocaine and fentanyl. Ding, ding, ding. The Kansas City police have said that there is no foul play suspected. And 2 of the family members recently told News Nation their bodies contained 3 times the amount of fentanyl needed to kill someone. But friends and family say many questions are still unanswered, especially about Willis. More than one person said it sounded like the Breaking Bad TV series come to life. This is really sad. This is tragic. But to come to the conclusion that it's anything more than it is at this point in time, you only get there if you want to get there. It's like people have been asleep at the wheel for the last 3 years. The only way that you buy into a Breaking Bad theory at this point is if you want to, or if you've been living under a rock or in a coma. Fentanyl poisonings are killing people every day in America. We had 100,000, they're calling them drug overdoses last year. That obviously sets a record, but it's really not drug overdoses. A lot of them are fentanyl poisonings. People think they're taking drugs and they're laced with fentanyl. They're coming from China to Mexico and flooding our southern border. And they're killing people. As far as I'm concerned, it's a war that China and in part the Mexican drug cartels are waging on everyday Americans who think they're doing a line of coke. I'm not saying that's right. It's not. But they think they're doing a line of coke and it's laced with fentanyl. And it's killing people. And it's happening every day. It's happening in rich neighborhoods, in poor neighborhoods, in white neighborhoods, in black neighborhoods. It knows and it has, it's not seeing anything. It's not seeing color. It's not seeing socioeconomic levels, demographics, or anything of that nature. It is impacting every single community in every corner of this country. And the only way you come to this bizarre conclusion is if you somehow have not been paying attention to what's going on in the world and what's going on in this country, because it is scary. It is dangerous. If you don't know what you're taking and you're putting things into your body from people that you don't really know all that well, and you don't know the exact specific source, and this is the stuff that's happening, and it's happening every day. The conclusion I keep coming to is that because it's the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are kind of the sexy team in America, if this was any other fan base, I don't think this will be getting national attention, to be honest. I just think anything with the Chiefs right now is clickable content for national media. So on Friday, when I talked a little bit about this, I had some people reach out to me on social media, on my X page at Pete Mundo. One guy wrote to me, and he said here, I have strong disagreement, and I'm frustrated with the tone and the contents of your commentary this morning. He says here, raising awareness about this topic is crucial. Most people do not fully grasp the dangers of fentanyl. Instead of complaining about TV coverage that can ultimately save lives by providing education on the issue, let's focus on raising awareness and saving lives. I agree with that. What I'm saying is national media is not using this to raise awareness on how fentanyl is coming to this country and killing people. They're using it as clickbait because anything with the Chiefs is clickable content right now for their outlets, for the Daily Mail, for the New York Post, for Fox News, for any of them. They're not using this story to raise awareness on how fentanyl is infiltrating our, drugs and young people are dying left and right. They're using it to make Breaking Bad references and to see if, 21st century real life Walter White is living in the Northland. Now, how this guy is supposedly sleeping for 48 hours, shows up at the door when the cops show up with boxers and an empty glass of wine, I'm curious too. I kind of wonder if he was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this just happened, and I'm just going to kind of wait this thing out because if I call the cops, maybe I get myself in trouble. But do I think he Walter Whited these guys? No. I don't have any evidence yet to suggest that's the case. Is it possible he freaked out? Saw his friends and was like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? If I call anybody, I'm screwed. Oh, no. And he kind of just, I don't know. But to say he offed them effectively is also highly irresponsible and is not in any way doing what national media should be doing, which is raising awareness on, yes, the fentanyl issue and how the heck we got here to begin with.
It's hard to get in the mind of somebody like that.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, if assuming he knew what was going on. But the suggestion here is that this guy whose house it was, Jordan Willis, he's an HIV scientist. He has a PhD from Vanderbilt. That, if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, by the way, what are you doing? Get on it this weekend before the Super Bowl. But somehow, basically he played a role in their deaths because he's a scientist and he knows how to mix things and, he could potentially do this to anybody. And there's a lot more evidence to suggest, based on what's going on in this country, that what really happened here is they got bad drugs. It was laced with fentanyl. No one knew it. They took it and they died. That is far more likely than any of this Walter White conspiracy theory crap going on. Especially as KCPD, right out of the gates, said at this point, we don't suspect any foul play. 913-408 795.7. A big week here in Kansas City kicked off last night with Taylor Swift taking home a bunch of Grammys. How about that? So we got to get you the latest on that. We'll get to our caller of the day. And we just might be able to track down before the end of the show Kathy Nelson, the Kansas City sports commissioner, who had a big day yesterday with the World Cup announcing 6 games, including a quarterfinals match, coming to Kansas City for the World Cup in 2026. That's all to come on KCMO Talk Radio 95.7 FM. Text line, Pete, to blame the homeowner in this Northland case. No, Jordan Willis. He's the guy whose house his 3 buddies were at when they died on the back porch. But question it, yes. Hope it all turns out to be a freak accident, but agree the story is waking oblivious people up after 3 years of crisis at the border. Yes. And if it does that, then there will be some good that comes out of the story. But if not, if we're going to sit here and pretend like, oh, this is really a Walter White conspiracy, man, we are missing the boat to use this story and actually, once again, message around it to why you can't have a border that is open to not just anyone walking in, but also fentanyl pouring in. Deadly amounts of fentanyl pouring in by the day. Sarah's in Overland Park. Hey, Sarah, you're on KCMO. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. What's happening?
Nothing. I just wanted to say the whole Walter White is ridiculous. I was telling Mark, your producer, that it just was such a series of unfortunate events. Like that guy, I mean, he probably did a line of coke with the fentanyl, maybe a little bit, and maybe it did knock him out for 48 hours. Or maybe he's an alcoholic and he did a bender for 48 hours and sleeping. I mean, the guy woke up in boxers and an empty wine glass. So that's weird. Mm-hmm. And my niece, like, it was so cold those 2 weeks. Like, she never even opened her blinds going out to the backyard. So if there were dead people, like, you might not say, I mean, that sounds awful. And like my sister, my family, we drink, we don't drive, we Uber, we leave our cars at each other's houses. We might not speak to each other for 2 or 3 days. We don't think anything of it. We sleep with box fans. I can't hear anything. So, I mean, I think this poor guy, I think he is a weirdo, but it's not, after you knew it had to be a toxicology issue.
But
and it is so unfortunate that it is fentanyl, and this is a wake-up call, and it's not a Walter White. And, yeah, quit flirting around the issue, people.
I know.
We have a crisis.
We have a crisis. I hope that this wakes people up to that, but they're not doing, I mean, national media is not doing that. They're hoping secretly that it's a grand conspiracy and this is really something more than what it obviously appears to be. And I say that because, Sarah, you know, it's happening every day in this country.
Well, and it happened at 3 normal men in freaking Kansas City, North Kansas City. That's middle America. Like, if it's happening here, which it is, it's happening everywhere. So it's just, and the media obviously is, they want to sensationalize everything. Mm-hmm. So it's really sad. Mm-hmm. Poor men. I mean, I know a lot of people that still do coke, smoke pot, whatever. I don't, but to each his own. And yeah, I mean, it's sad that you have to worry about having it laced with something or not even knowing. I don't know. It's a wake-up call.
It is. I hope people are waking up, Sarah. I'm glad you're not partaking anymore. That's good for you and good for us. Keep listening. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
All right. Good deal. I know many of you feel the same way. Mark, can you emphatically agree with what Sarah just said there?
Yeah.
You've turned over a new leaf?
Yeah.
good.
I'm not going back.
I think I've seen Mark drink like half a beer in the how many years now he's been working here? Going on 3 almost.
Yeah, I'm pretty moderate in that.
Yeah, I mean, I get Mark to a politics in a pint, and I'm like, come on, Mark, let's go. Woo! Woo! And he won't do it.
Back, too, of course. Remember, there was a time we talked about you were going to get some of my allotment.
Yeah.
We can only have so many units of beer here.
I think John gets 6 beers a year. Isn't that the number, give or take? Maybe it's a 12-pack a year?
Well, those are usually in one setting because I can't just drink one. So I don't usually drink one.
You know what we did on Friday? I mentioned we went down to Union Station. Took the girls down. You know, they had all the Chief stuff down there. So we did that on Friday afternoon. And we've done that in recent years, but we usually went on Saturday, where it's just a madhouse. So we went downtown, and by the way, the girls are like, what's with the Ferris wheel sitting on the side of the highway?
Exactly.
I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea.
I literally had lunch at a sidewalk, a restaurant down there on Southwest Boulevard this Saturday, and we're watching that thing. It's like, what?
What in this?
Good thing we found the low point.
Clara was like, can we go on it, Dad? I'm like, no.
Not today.
I just don't trust that thing. Sorry. But, yeah, so we went down there to Union Station on Friday afternoon, and it took us a half hour to take pictures in front of all the little things. Like, I put up a photo. There's one on my Instagram stories right now, at Pete Mundo, of Claire and Chloe in front of the little Taylor Swift cutout, which I know is going to trigger many of you. I know. I'm
getting pissed now.
You're going to live. It's going to be okay. And it was a lot of fun. They did a good job. You know, Jason Kelsey's got a little cutout there with his shirt off, holding a couple beers. Like, it looks great. So it took us all of a half hour to blow through there. So now we're like, okay, what do we do now? What do we do? All right, well, let's. So we drove down the boulevard because I hadn't been there in a long time. You know, I'm the only one that can drink. Kate's pregnant, so. But she's like, yeah, let's go down the boulevard. They had a pretty cool non-alcoholic cork that she wanted to try out, so that was all good. Let the kids hang out and see what it's all about. So we drive right by the Ferris wheel. Friday afternoon, 50-some-odd degrees. Boulevard's already popping. And, I mean, maybe I saw half a dozen people hanging outside the Ferris wheel. 2 of them were workers, it looked like. I'm rooting for that thing to succeed because I want business in Kansas City to succeed. But I don't know. And the little mini golf course was right there, which I hadn't seen it all in person until I drove by it on Friday. I have no idea how that thing's going to do well. No idea. I mean, maybe you catch some people leaving Boulevard, you know, woo, let's go play mini golf and ride the Ferris wheel. Yeah. I mean,
you got to make your bank on First Friday.
But it's kind of tucked there. You know, it's just, I mean, you can't miss it, but at the same time, it's not really walkable to anything. Even Boulevard, you're probably going to get in the car and drive down the street because that's how we are in this town. I don't know. I hope it does well, but Kate and I were talking about it, and it's like, if this thing fails, who takes down the Ferris wheel, by the way? It's just going to sit there for years.
They'll keep it till at least the World Cup.
Maybe, just to look good. But it doesn't even look good. Like, this isn't Vegas. We don't need it. Coming up, our caller of the day. And then we'll see if we can get to Kathy Nelson by the end of the show. Ray Stevens takes over at 10 on KCMO 95.7.